What's going on, everybody? Khalipas Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Google Pixel 6a. Now, as always, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more about this phone, I will be linking to several other videos about it in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and my favorite accessories for it. But with all that being said, let's get into it. So the Google Pixel 6a is basically Google's entry-level flagship phone. Essentially, it's a more affordable version of something like the Google Pixel 6 or the 6 Pro. And in general, I would say it's pretty comparable to something like a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE or an iPhone SE. So the main idea here is that you're going to be getting a lot of flagship features and flagship level performance for a much more affordable price than a top-of-the-line Google Pixel 6 Pro, for example. And in general, with the Google Pixel 6a, Google did do a really good job with this concept. With the display, for example, unlike an iPhone SE that has a really tiny display that's honestly not the best quality, the Google Pixel 6a has a 6.1-inch OLED display with a really nice looking 1080p resolution and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So although it's not as large as a top-of-the-line flagship phone, and it doesn't have a super high refresh rate like a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, for example, the image itself is still great. It's sharp and clear, great viewing angles, the colors are nice and vibrant, it's decently large while still being compact enough for those of you who don't want an enormous phone, and with the 20:9 aspect ratio giving the phone a taller and more narrow form factor, you'll get a more immersive cinematic experience in landscape mode and a better scrolling experience too. In general, while there are some top-of-the-line phones out there that have better displays, the Google Pixel 6a really doesn't disappoint, and for an entry-level flagship phone, it's pretty much exactly what I would expect. Now, when it comes to storage, we are faced with the same problem we see in pretty much every high-end device out there, and that is that it doesn't have microSD card expansion. Now, that being said, we are getting 128GB of internal storage, which is pretty good. For me personally, I actually have an iPhone 13 with that same amount of storage as my personal phone, and I've never had any issues myself. But that being said, I'm not really the biggest power user out there, and I know a lot of people have tons of apps and maybe a lot of photos and videos, for example, and after a while that can really add up. So as with pretty much every high-end device, not having microSD card expansion is already a disadvantage. But with the Google Pixel 6a, when it comes to storage, 128GB is the only option for storage. Now, for most people, this is probably going to be perfectly fine, but considering that this phone's competitors, like the iPhone SE and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, have other variants with 256GB of storage, I know that for some people, not getting the option will be disappointing. Now, for security features, the Google Pixel 6a has a really nice looking in-display fingerprint scanner that I've found to work really well, but unfortunately we're not getting Face Unlock here. Now, this really is too bad, seeing as most Android phones do have both options. Like, for example, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE does have an in-display fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock, but then again, it's not really that big a deal, because when it comes to these higher end devices, not all of them do have both options. Like, for example, the iPhone SE also only has a fingerprint scanner, and then regular iPhones only have Face Unlock. So while it would have been nice to see the Google Pixel 6a have Face Unlock in addition to the fingerprint scanner, at least this fingerprint scanner actually does work really well. And in general, I feel like most people like the fingerprint scanners a little bit better than Face Unlock anyway. So at the end of the day, not having Face Unlock really isn't that much of a loss. Now, one of my favorite things about the Google Pixel 6a has to be the camera. Despite having a relatively simple setup with an 8-megapixel selfie camera, a 12.2-megapixel main camera, and a 12-megapixel ultra-wide camera, the Google Pixel 6a really takes amazing photos and videos. Now, I did actually do a full review of this phone's camera setup, which I will be linking to in the description below, so definitely check that out if you want to see a more detailed analysis. But overall, again, this phone does take great photos. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's a photo taken with the main camera. I really have no complaints here, definitely turned out real nice. It's really bright, the details look good, the colors are not only nice and vibrant, but they also look realistic instead of being oversaturated, and in general, it's definitely what you would expect from a flagship phone. One thing that's even more impressive with this camera is how well it handles low lighting. With this picture, for example, it was actually quite a bit darker than it looks, and everything still came out great. The details still look good, the colors look really nice, and even though the lighting itself isn't exactly accurate, it still looks realistic instead of looking like it was artificially brightened. So in general, whether you're taking a lot of photos at night, or maybe you live in a place with bad weather, whatever the case may be, when you're taking photos with the Google Pixel 6a, you won't need to worry about bad lighting ruining things. And the same kind of thing goes for video. Maybe it's not quite as good as the photos, but that's kind of to be expected. In general, I would say as far as low lighting goes, the Google Pixel 6a really performs well. With the ultra-wide camera, just like every other camera feature on this phone, it does work really well. In this picture, there's really minimal distortion, so if you're taking lots of scenery photos, skyline photos, vacation type stuff, and you want to be able to fit more content into the frame, with the Google Pixel 6a, you'll be able to get a lot of really nice photos like that. Now another thing you might be wondering about is the macro camera, because this phone doesn't technically have one. But despite that, as you can see here, it can get some really good close-up detailed images, and while having a dedicated macro camera still does have its own advantages, even without one, the Pixel 6a still can easily get that kind of picture. So unless getting really close-up detailed images is one of the main things you're doing when you're taking photos, not having a macro camera really won't be an issue with this phone. Now when it comes to video, the Google Pixel 6a can record in 4K at 60 frames per second in the rear camera and 1080p at 30 frames per second in the front. Now the thing with the front-facing camera is kind of a weird move to me, because both the iPhone SE and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE can record in 4K in the front, and while recording 4K selfie videos is honestly more of a niche feature, considering that all the competitors are doing it, is sort of a weird thing for Google to just leave out. But regardless, the videos this phone records, especially in the rear camera, are really good. With videos, just like the photos, the image is nice and sharp, the details look great, the colors are really nice, and everything looks really professional. But aside from that, one thing I found really impressive here is the audio quality. Now on one hand, if you're recording a video where you need seriously good audio quality, you're probably going to be better off just getting an external mic. But compared to something like an iPhone, for example, the Google Pixel 6a actually has really good quality by itself. So to give you an idea of what this sounds like, check out this clip. So we're doing a test video with the Google Pixel 6a. We are recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Also keep in mind what the audio quality sounds like. So clearly there, it's not going to be nearly as good as something like this microphone, for example. But in general, for a built-in microphone on a smartphone, I mean, my iPhone 13 doesn't sound nearly that good, and I would say it's pretty comparable to the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, which I do use to record a lot of the videos on this channel. So overall, whether you're taking photos, recording videos, or both, the Google Pixel 6a is going to give you pretty much flagship level quality, and if you're looking for something at that level without paying $1,400 for something like a Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, you're really not going to go wrong with this phone. Now that being said, I have made a full video focused on this phone's camera features, which I will be linking to in the description, so if you want to learn more about what this camera can do, definitely check that out as well. Now with this phone, as far as processing power goes, it's pretty good, especially compared to your average mid-range phone, but compared to other entry-level flagship phones like the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE and the iPhone SE, I would say it's a little bit underwhelming. Now don't get me wrong, this is not a slow phone by any means. With 6GB of RAM in the Google Tensor processor, you can expect it to handle pretty much anything you throw at it, so whether you're doing higher performance activities like mobile gaming, or more basic activities like web browsing and social media use, you will get a good experience either way. But just keep in mind, while this phone is significantly faster than something like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G or the Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G, compared to other entry-level flagship phones like, for example, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, while the Pixel 6a is definitely a fast phone in and of itself, it's still not the fastest phone in its price range. Now I did run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and here are the scores right here. Like I said, it is a fast phone, but compared to phones like the iPhone SE and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, it's just not going to be quite as fast. But what I do recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone is going to be a good upgrade for you. Because if you're coming from more of a budget phone, I definitely do think this phone would be a great upgrade, but if you're coming from an older flagship phone like a Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus, for example, then in that case it might be a different story. Now as far as the battery goes, with a 4410 mAh battery, the Google Pixel 6a is not going to have the longest battery life out there compared to a lower end phone like the Moto G Power, for example, that's specifically designed for its battery, but for an entry-level flagship phone that people are really going to be getting for its performance and features instead of just its battery life, the battery on this phone is actually pretty good. Compared to its competitors, the Google Pixel 6a has a much larger battery than the iPhone SE and about the same size battery as the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, and in my experience it does hold up pretty well to daily use, so unless you're playing games or watching a video for hours at a time, you can at least expect this phone to last through the day without having to charge. And if you are more of a heavy user and you do happen to drain your battery a little bit faster, keep in mind this phone does support 18-watt fast charging as well, and in my experience, with the right fast charger, the charging speed is really good. As far as other features go, this phone does have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, you'll be happy to know you will be able to do that with this phone. But then again, in this day and age, for a phone in this price range, that's more or less an expectation. But speaking of features you normally find in flagship phones, one feature this phone weirdly doesn't have is wireless charging. Now in another phone that may be a little bit lower end than this phone, but not necessarily an actual low-end phone, like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G for example, this really wouldn't be much of a surprise. But seeing as the Pixel 6a is an entry-level flagship phone and pretty much every other phone like this has that feature, regardless of whether or not you actually use it, it is a little odd to me that this phone doesn't have it. But that being said, I guess not every phone has to have every feature, and I feel like Google more than makes up for this with the design of the phone itself. Now when it comes to aesthetics and stuff like that, of course, this is pretty subjective, but compared to both the iPhone SE and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, I do personally feel like the Google Pixel 6a has the best design here. It has a really nice, sleek, modern look, a minimalistic but still unique design for the camera module on the back, which almost kind of reminds me of a more modern, refined version of the Samsung Galaxy S10, which I thought was really cool. And aside from just the appearance, the phone has great build quality, really premium feeling materials, and it also has a good amount of weight to it. So in general, when it comes to which phone looks and feels the best, this is obviously going to be pretty subjective, but the bottom line is I do think Google did a really good job on the design here. But in conclusion, my overall thoughts about the Google Pixel 6a, unless I'm being really nitpicky, which I'm going to save for another video, I really don't have any legitimate complaints about this phone. The display is great, and while it's not the largest phone out there, you gotta remember, this is a Google Pixel 6a. It's not a Google Pixel 6 Pro or an iPhone 13 Pro Max. This is an entry-level flagship phone, which of course is not supposed to be the absolute best in the game. And for what it is, I really do like the display. And if you're consuming a lot of content, you are going to get a great experience here. We also got a really good camera setup here that compares to even higher end phones than this. The processing power is great, the battery life is good for what it is, and again, I really like the overall design. The only actual complaints I can think of right now, and these are really not that big a deal, are first of all the storage. With 128GB of internal storage and no microSD card expansion, yeah, it is going to be okay for most people, but for power users who have a lot of photos and videos and apps and stuff like that, it would be nice to at least get a 256GB version like so many other higher end devices have. The only other slightly disappointing thing is that there's no wireless charging, and depending on whether or not you actually use the feature, this might not even matter at all. So at the end of the day, if you're looking for a higher end device with flagship level performance, a nice looking display, a great camera setup, a pretty good battery, and a really nice premium design overall, I do think the Google Pixel 6a will give you a great experience, all while being reasonably affordable. But I want to know what you guys think. Are you going to get a Google Pixel 6a? Or if you have one, how are you liking it so far? Definitely let me know in the comments. But this concludes my review of the Google Pixel 6a. Again, if you want to learn more about this phone, I do have a ton of other videos about it, which I will be linking to in the description below, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and my favorite accessories for it. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kaleipas Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next one.